It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon indoors, with the television playing softly in the background, sunlight streaming through the curtains, and toys scattered across the living room rug, as always. The children were there, distracted by laughter and petty childish conflicts, while the adults went about their daily routine, confident that everything was perfectly safe. But that day, among the seemingly innocent objects, there was something different, something hidden, where no one would think to look. He was just trying to pick up the teddy bear his younger sister had dropped behind the couch when he realized something was off about the toy's weight. Pressing the center of the toy, he felt a rigid structure, incompatible with the soft stuffing. Curious, he carefully opened the seam, expecting to find perhaps a piece of plastic, a broken sound chip, a common part. But what emerged there between the hand-sewn foam was the metallic glint of a lens. A camera, cold, steady, poised to observe and record. Shock gripped the room. The eyes that had once been playful now trembled, and what should have been just a stuffed toy revealed itself to be the center of a mystery that had been growing unnoticed. What had seemed like mere discomfort in recent weeks, like doors creaking for no reason or the feeling of being watched, now made sense. Someone was watching. Minutes later, the police would arrive. But the question no one could answer echoed through the silence of the house. Who had placed that camera inside the toy? And how long had the family been unknowingly watched? If this story has kept you hooked so far, subscribe to the channel and leave a like to stay tuned for more impactful stories. Jordan Thompson was only 11 years old, but his eyes betrayed a precocious maturity that often went unnoticed by the adults around him. The son of Angela, a dedicated nurse who spent long hours at the city hospital, Jordan grew up learning to fend for himself amid his mother's inevitable absences. He wasn't one to complain, nor did he demand excessive attention, and perhaps that's why he developed a habit of remaining silent, observing the world around him with the patience of someone who preferred to understand before speaking. That silence, however, wasn't a sign of disinterest, but rather the reflection of a curious and attentive mind, capable of noticing details that most overlooked. At school, teachers recognized his intelligence, but also pointed to his shyness as a barrier. Jordan rarely raised his hand to answer questions in class, even though he knew the answers. His classmates, on the other hand, saw him as the weird kid who preferred taking apart remote-controlled cars to playing basketball during recess. This behavior often resulted in giggles and snide comments, which he preferred to ignore. There was only one person to whom Jordan truly opened up: his 7-year-old sister, Lila, a cheerful, energetic girl who saw him as a true hero. It was for Lila that Jordan saved his most sincere smile. He accompanied her to her room every night, making sure the lamp was on to dispel her fears. He was also the one who fixed the toys she insisted on breaking out of her childish curiosity. Between them lay a nearly indestructible bond, woven not only by blood, but by the complicity of those who, in a way, protected each other. Angela, the mother, observed this affection between her children from afar and felt proud of the boy she was raising, even though the exhausting routine often blinded her to the weight of responsibility Jordan silently carried. To her, he was simply a responsible boy, mature for his age, but still a boy like any other. What Angela didn't realize was that behind that calm and reserved demeanor, Jordan also harbored small, invisible wounds. The feeling of not being taken seriously, the pain of being constantly disbelieved, and the fear of not being able to protect the only family he had. On the neighborhood streets, Jordan often walked with his head down, but his eyes darted from side to side, attentive to details that other residents missed. He noticed when the same car passed more than once, noticed lit windows at unusual times, and recognized strange patterns that no one else seemed to notice. It was as if his mind worked like a silent radar, always on alert, picking up signals that adults ignored. And so, between the routine of school, his mother's long absences, and caring for Leila, Jordan lived his days with the feeling that something was off, as if an invisible detail were trying to get his attention. And perhaps it was precisely this sensitivity, combined with the silence in which he usually took refuge, that would prepare him to discover something that would change not only his life, but also the fate of everyone around him. However, before he could comprehend the weight of this instinct, small signs began to emerge unexpectedly, almost like whispers that something much bigger and frightening was about to happen. The first weeks of autumn brought a mild climate to Jordan's neighborhood. The trees were changing color, the streets were covered with dry leaves, and the houses exuded that familiar air of tranquil routine. However, for Jordan, the calm hid something that seemed at odds with the peaceful scenery. His ever-vigilant eyes began to notice small irregularities that others would have missed. It all started with a black car with tinted windows, parked almost every afternoon on the same street. Sometimes it changed position, but it never seemed to have a clear owner. To the neighbors, it was just another vehicle among many others, but Jordan noticed it was always there when he came home from school. The detail that intrigued him most was that the engine remained off and no one got out of the car. Still, there was the strange feeling that someone was watching from inside. At night, when the neighborhood fell silent, Jordan would hear sounds that seemed to come from outside his window. Light footsteps in the yard, a quick rustle in the bushes, as if someone had hidden there. He tried to get his mother's attention, but Angela, tired after long shifts at the hospital, attributed it to the wind or her son's overactive imagination. Jordan remained silent, but inside he felt a chill of suspicion growing. Even inside his home, he began to notice unusual things. One of Lila's favorite toys, a rag doll, was often misplaced where she claimed to have left it. One night, he swore he saw a small red light blink rapidly in his sister's room, but when he searched, he found nothing. Jordan's restless mind scrambled for rational explanations, but the more he observed, the more convinced he became that something was wrong. At school, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave him. He noticed lingering glances from strangers near the gate, men who seemed to always be passing through but never moving on. It was as if invisible. Threads were connecting around his life and that of his family, slowly tightening a noose that no one but him seemed to notice. The boy, though haunted by these perceptions, didn't let on much. He knew that if he spoke too much, he would be labeled paranoid or dreamy. So he kept the details to himself, silently nursing a growing anguish. The more he tried to ignore them, the more the signs multiplied, as if reality itself were screaming at him to pay attention. And so it was that Jordan, even without fully understanding, began to carry within himself the certainty that something sinister was lurking in his home. An uneasy certainty, like the feeling of walking down a dark hallway, knowing that at some point a door will open, revealing a disturbing truth. Little did he know that this door was about to open unexpectedly, when a simple gesture of care for his sister would lead him to a discovery that would change everything forever. One seemingly ordinary afternoon, Jordan was in her room helping Lila organize her toys. The girl ran from one place to the other, scattering dolls, building blocks, and small objects that filled the floor with color. Among them was Lila's favorite teddy bear, a worn toy but filled with affection. Suddenly, as she pulled it closer, the girl noticed that one of the seams on the side had come undone, exposing the stuffing inside. Lila frowned in displeasure and held the toy out to her brother. "Fix it for me, Jordan. You always know how to fix and things. He smiled softly, picked up the teddy bear, and walked over to the table where he kept some thread and needles he used to mend things. It wasn't the first time he'd sewn one of his sister's toys. With the ease of someone who was used to it, he began to open the seam a little more to adjust the fabric, but as he did so, his fingers brushed against something hard, completely out of place. Jordan's gaze fixed on the opening. Nestled in the white cotton was a small metallic object, cold too. The touch, something that definitely didn't belong in a children's toy. Heart pounding, he carefully removed the object and froze. It was a tiny camera, the size of a quarter, with a discreet lens and a barely visible wire. A shiver ran down his spine. He turned the object over in his hands, examining every detail until he noticed a small red dot blinking slowly. It wasn't off, it was active. Jordan's breath became shallow, and the previously mundane environment now felt suffocating. Lila, confused, asked if her brother was finished, but he didn't answer immediately. He was mesmerized by the discovery, unable to believe that someone could have hidden something so disturbing inside his sister's toy. Thoughts raced. Who had put it there? Why? Were there other cameras around the house? And most terrifyingly, what had already been recorded or broadcast? Jordan felt the pressure of carrying a secret that could put his entire family in danger. He tried to calm himself, took a deep breath, and placed the camera on the table, picking up the empty teddy bear. His eyes scanned every detail of the toy, as if searching for additional clues, but nothing beyond that device revealed anything unusual. It was just an innocent teddy bear that had suddenly become proof that someone was watching them without them realizing it. Jordan looked at his sister, who smiled innocently, playing with other dolls. The contrast between her innocence and the object in her hands made his heart ache. For the first time, he felt the true weight of what he had been sensing for weeks. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't the fantasies of a silent boy. Something dark was lurking in his home, and now he had the first concrete evidence of it. But the most painful part was yet to come, because in trying to warn those he loved most, Jordan would discover that no one was willing to believe his discovery. Jordan ran downstairs, clutching the teddy bear in one hand and the small camera in the other. His heart was pounding, and his shallow breaths betrayed the urgency he felt. He found his mother in the kitchen, tired after another shift, preparing a simple dinner. Angela looked up and was surprised by her son's distressed expression. "Mom, look at this. I found it inside Lila's toy. It's not normal, it's a camera. Someone is spying on us." Angela frowned, wiped her hands on her apron, and picked up the object. She looked at it quickly, turning it over in her fingers, but then sighed deeply, placing it on the table. "Jordan, it's probably just a broken electronic part, maybe in the toy itself. These manufacturers put all sorts of things in these days. You're tired, son. Don't be scared by everything." His mother's indifference washed over him like a bucket of cold water. Jordan insisted he'd seen the red light flash, but Angela shook her head, dismissing it. To her, it was just the overactive imagination of a child too smart for her age. The next day at school, Jordan tried to share his discovery with his science teacher, believing she would understand better. He showed her the device and explained where he'd gotten it, but the reaction was equally disappointing. The teacher, with a forced smile, simply said, "You have a great imagination, Jordan. Maybe you're watching too many movies. Put that in your backpack and focus on class." The boy returned to his seat, feeling the weight of being discredited once again. His classmates chuckled quietly, calling him a spy. Hunter, as if it were a joke. He lowered his head, but frustration burned inside. At home, Lila continued to play innocently with her other toys, and Jordan couldn't help but wonder if any of them were hiding secrets. But how could he warn his mother again without being accused of exaggeration? How could he convince someone to see what he had seen with his own eyes? The loneliness of this responsibility was suffocating. Over the next few nights, Jordan began to sleep poorly. His fear wasn't just about the camera itself, but about the feeling that something bigger was happening, something that could put his family at risk. Every shadow cast by the window, every rustle in the yard, every sound from the black car parked on the street seemed to scream to him that the danger was real. Deep down, Jordan desperately wanted someone to listen to him, someone to confirm that he wasn't going crazy. But his mother's indifference and his teacher's disbelief pushed him deeper and deeper into an agonizing silence. It was as if the entire world were blind to a threat only he could see. And it was precisely in this forced silence that Jordan made the riskiest decision of his life. If no one believed him, then he would have to seek answers himself, even if that brought him face to face with the danger that lurked in the shadows. That night seemed like so many others, but for Jordan, there was no turning back. After being ignored, he decided he couldn't rely on adults for understanding. If no one believed him, he would have to act alone. The first thing he did was hide the discovered camera inside a shoebox in his room, as if it were a dangerous secret that needed to be kept at all costs. The simple act of hiding it heightened the feeling that he was entering forbidden territory, as if he had opened a door to a world where nothing would ever be the same. Jordan began examining Lila's other toys for clues. He spent hours in his sister's room, fiddling with dolls, cars, and even the children's lamp. In two of them, he found wires too thin to be part of the original structure. He couldn't tell if they were just factory defects or new hidden devices, but the doubt was enough to worry him. He wrote everything down in a school notebook, drawing the toys and marking the suspicious spots as if compiling his own secret dossier. With each new detail, his mind worked silently, creating hypotheses. Who had put it there? How had someone managed to enter the house without them? Noticing, and most terrifyingly, how long had they been watched? During the day, while Angela worked, Jordan would spend hours at the window, watching the black car parked on the street. Using his mother's cell phone, which he used secretly, he tried to discreetly take photos of the license plate and the driver, though he could rarely see a face clearly. The car seemed always present, but calculatedly, shifting its position, as if only wanting to be noticed by those who were paying attention. One afternoon, he summoned courage and decided to discreetly follow the car. He pretended to be heading to the corner market, but kept his eyes fixed on the vehicle. When the engine finally started and the car moved slowly, Jordan pedaled his bike, keeping his distance. His heart was racing, his hands sweating on the handlebars, but the determination to uncover the truth drove him forward. The car traveled a few streets until it stopped in front of a seemingly ordinary house, a little further from the center of the neighborhood. Jordan couldn't get very close, but he etched every detail in his mind. The neglected facade, the rusty gate, and the figure of a burly man who got out, looked around, and quickly entered. It was the first time he had associated a face with that mystery. It was Mr. Howard, the caretaker who looked after a few houses on the street, always smiling, greeting his neighbors as if he were part of the landscape. Suddenly, the memory of his constant presence took on new weight. Perhaps that smile was just a mask, and behind it lay the culprit of something much darker. That night, Jordan returned home, his body trembling with fear and excitement. He felt he was getting closer to the truth, but at the same time, he realized that with every step, he put himself and his sister at risk. Still, he couldn't stop. With each clue uncovered, it was as if a terrifying puzzle were forming before his eyes, revealing an enemy hiding in plain sight. He locked himself in his room, and under the dim light of the lamp, wrote in large letters at the top of his notebook, "They are watching us." He looked out the window and noticed the silhouette of the black car stopped again, motionless, as if it knew exactly what the boy was doing. What Jordan didn't yet know was that his discoveries were about to reveal fragments of a much larger truth, a puzzle that would link his investigation to ancient secrets, disappearances, and a danger he could never imagine facing alone. Following days transformed Jordan's life into a secretive routine, almost as if he were a silent detective living parallel to the normal world his mother and sister still believed they inhabited. While Angela insisted it was all just childish paranoia, Jordan collected evidence and hid it like dangerous treasures. Each new detail brought him closer to confirming that his family was, in fact, being watched. One morning, leafing through the newspaper his neighbor left at the gate, his eyes fell on a short article hidden among larger columns. The article discussed the disappearances of children in nearby neighborhoods. There wasn't much information, just dates, ages, and the disturbing detail that toys tampered with listening devices had been found in some of the raided homes. Jordan felt a shiver run through his body. It wasn't a coincidence. The camera inside Lila's teddy bear was directly connected to those cases. Moved by this discovery, he began reviewing the notebooks where he had recorded his observations. Within the pages, the drawings of toys with strange wires now made sense. The repeating patterns indicated a scheme, something carefully planned and implemented across several families without anyone noticing. What had previously seemed merely a figment of his imagination now became part of a much larger, dangerous, and cruel surveillance network. Mr. Howard's face came back to him with a vengeance. The neighborly caretaker, always helpful, always available to mend. Fences or help with small repairs now appeared before Jordan as the connecting link. He remembered the times Howard had suddenly appeared in the yard, claiming to be passing by to check on everything. Perhaps back then Jordan hadn't paid attention, but now every gesture seemed charged with ulterior motives. One night, determined to confirm his suspicions, he waited for everyone to fall asleep. Sitting at the window, staring out at the street, he saw the black car parked again. The moonlight partially revealed the driver's figure, and for a moment Jordan was certain it was Howard behind the wheel. His heart raced, but at the same time, a flame of determination grew within him. If before there had been doubt, now there was conviction. Danger was right there, living among them, pretending to be a friend, hiding behind a facade of normalcy. With each detail, the puzzle came together. Jordan understood that this wasn't just his home, but a larger pattern, a scheme that had already affected other families and had somehow chosen his as its next target. This realization brought with it a crushing weight. How could an 11-year-old boy fight against something so enormous? Still, the idea of remaining silent seemed unbearable. He knew he needed more proof, something impossible to deny. Only then could he protect Lila and convince his mother that they weren't safe. And deep in his mind, the feeling grew that the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous his path would become. What Jordan didn't imagine was that, as he connected the pieces of this dark puzzle, danger itself was already moving toward him, ready to knock on the door and transform his suspicions into a tangible threat. That night, the wind blew hard through the quiet neighborhood streets. The trees creaked, and the sound of dry leaves dragging against the asphalt created an unsettling melody. Jordan was sitting on his bed, notebook open and notes scattered, when he heard a strange noise. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the snapping of branches. It was something closer, more distinct, the metallic sound of a gate being forced open. His entire body stiffened. He approached the window and discreetly pulled back the curtain. The black car was once again parked in front of his house, headlights off. For a moment, nothing happened until he noticed a shadow moving beside the garage. A man, tall and burly, approached slowly, as if he knew exactly what he was looking for. Jordan recognized the posture immediately. It was Mr. Howard. The boy's heart raced and a surge of adrenaline coursed through his veins. He ran to Lila's room, where she was fast asleep, hugging her pillow. He lightly touched her shoulder. "Shh, don't make any noise. Come with me." The girl, sleepy and confused, obeyed her brother without understanding. Jordan led her to the closet, asking her to remain completely silent. As soon as she closed the door, she heard the unmistakable click of the living room doorknob being forced. The intruder was inside. Jordan hurried back to the hallway and caught sight of the shadow crossing the living room. The streetlights partially illuminated the figure, and there was no longer any doubt. Howard was moving slowly through the house, as if he had all the time in the world. Jordan backed away, trying not to make a sound, but the creak of a loose floorboard betrayed his presence. The man turned suddenly, their eyes meeting in the darkness. Jordan felt a sharp chill run down his spine. He ran toward the kitchen, grabbing his mother's cell phone from the counter, but before he could call anyone, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. The chase began. Howard was advancing like a relentless shadow, and Jordan, breathing heavily, ran through the hallways trying to lose him. He reached the backyard, threw open the back door, and bolted. The cold wind slapped at his face, but the feeling that he would be overtaken at any moment drove him to run faster. For a moment, he considered shouting for help, but the fear of waking Lila and exposing her further kept him silent. His feet pounded the concrete floor, each step echoing like a war drum. Behind him, Howard's footsteps were strong and menacing, closing the distance between them. In a last-ditch effort, Jordan ran to the neighbor's yard, crossing a loose wooden fence. He slipped and fell, but quickly got up. Looking back, he saw Howard's figure standing on the other side, motionless, just watching. There was something more disturbing about his calm than if he had continued to pursue. Jordan was breathing heavily, clutching his phone tightly. He hurriedly recorded a video of Howard's shadow and the black car parked in front of the house. He knew it wasn't definitive proof, but it was the closest thing he had so far. Trembling, he returned to the house through the backyard and locked himself and Lila in the bedroom. As he embraced his sister, he felt that, in that instant, the fine line between suspicion and real danger had been broken. It was no longer just a solitary investigation. Now the enemy knew he was paying attention. And just when he thought he had narrowly escaped, Jordan would discover that this confrontation was just the beginning, as the revelation of his evidence would awaken the entire city to a secret that no one was prepared to face. The next morning, Jordan woke with the memory of the nighttime chase still vivid. Images of Howard breaking into his home burned in his mind like a constant warning. He knew he couldn't keep it quiet any longer. He needed to turn his fear into action, and the only way was to show the world what he had discovered. While Angela prepared for another shift at the hospital, Jordan pretended to go to school as usual. However, in his backpack, besides his notebooks, were the torn teddy bear, the removed camera, and the cell phone with the video recorded from the night before. Each item was a crucial piece of a puzzle no one else wanted to see. After school, instead of heading home, Jordan walked to the local police station. His steps were unsteady, but firm enough to demonstrate he carried a truth that needed to be heard. When an officer met him, he pulled his camera from his backpack and showed the recorded video. At first, the officers looked skeptical, but as Jordan described in detail what he had observed, the black car, the wires on the toys, the nighttime sounds, and finally, the break-in inside his own home, the room fell into a heavy silence, One of the officers called for immediate backup, and soon other officers were analyzing the footage. When they finally realized the camera was indeed active and that the video showed a figure entering the residence, there was no longer any room for doubt. This was serious, very serious. That same night, the first news reports began to circulate. Local reporters surrounded Jordan's street, and stunned neighbors crowded before the television cameras. The images were unclear, but enough to spark collective outrage. The once peaceful neighborhood was now seething with fear and anger. Angela, stunned, didn't know whether to hug her son for saving the family or cry for not believing him sooner. Lila, not fully understanding, clung to her brother as if he were her only shield against the world. And Jordan, amid the chaos of the exhibition, felt torn between the relief of finally being heard and the anguish of knowing the nightmare was just beginning. Because, although the entire city was now in shock, the true outcome was still far off. The criminals had not been caught, and the network orchestrating this shadowy surveillance still operated in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to react. And it was precisely in this vacuum, between revelation and action, that the situation would reach its peak, as the hunt for those responsible was about to begin, leading Jordan and his family to the center of an operation that would change everything. With Jordan's evidence, the police could no longer ignore the gravity of the situation. Within hours, an operation was hastily organized, involving local officers and a team specializing in crimes against minors. The entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the next move as patrol cars discreetly spread out through the streets, surrounding strategic points. That night, Jordan and his family were taken to a safe location. Even so, the boy insisted on following the operation from a distance. He harbored an unshakable sense of responsibility, as if bearing the truth had given him not only fear, but also the courage to see justice done. The target was the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the same place Jordan had seen the black car heading weeks earlier. The decaying-looking building concealed a sophisticated network of technology and surveillance within. When the officers raided it, they found dozens of cameras, computers, and maps detailing the routines of entire families. It was a scene of silent horror, confirming Jordan's every suspicion and revealing the monstrous extent of the scheme. Some men were surprised at the scene. They tried to flee, but were quickly subdued. Others, however, disappeared into the darkness, as if expecting their imminent downfall. Among those detained were Howard's accomplices, all involved in a coordinated scheme to monitor children and plan kidnappings. The scene was chaotic, with screams, flashlights cutting through the darkness, and police radios broadcasting urgent orders. For Jordan, witnessing that moment was like seeing everything he'd been silently carrying for weeks come to life. What had previously been just a hunch became a concrete reality. He was no longer the ignored boy. Now, his courage had exposed a system that could have destroyed countless lives. When the police finally emerged from the warehouse carrying boxes of evidence and handcuffed criminals, the town knew that night would go down in history. Police cars lined up outside the scene, reporters broadcast live, and neighbors who had previously been skeptical now bowed to the truth revealed by an 11-year-old boy. But despite the apparent victory, Jordan knew it wasn't the end. There were more people involved, perhaps in places they couldn't yet imagine. The arrest of a few didn't mean the network was completely dismantled, and this silent, dark certainty stayed with him, even as he watched the culprits being taken away. Because when the dust from the operation settled and the city began to applaud the outcome, there was still one final act left. A decisive moment that would not only bring recognition, but also confront Jordan with the most painful truth of all. The operation was over, the criminals were behind bars, and the city breathed a sigh of relief. But for Jordan, the feeling was different. He knew he had played a vital role, that his discoveries had saved lives, but the silence of the previous days still echoed within him. It was impossible to forget that when he most needed to be heard, no one believed his word. The next morning, the entire school was in an uproar. Teachers, students, and even staff were discussing the news dominating the local newspapers. 11-year-old boy helps police dismantle criminal network. As Jordan walked through the gate, he felt the eyes fixed on him. Some were in astonishment, others in admiration, and even those who had laughed at him days before were now whispering in respect. The principal called him to the front of the class and, in an emotional speech, publicly apologized for not appreciating his courage. His classmates applauded, but Jordan remained serious, without a single smile. At home, Angela couldn't stop crying. She hugged her son repeatedly, begging for forgiveness between sobs. "I should have believed you from the beginning. Forgive me, son, forgive me." Jordan simply wrapped her in a silent embrace. There was no resentment in his eyes, but the pain of his mother's disbelief still left deep scars. For him, more than public recognition, what hurt was knowing that his own mother had doubted his voice. The police also wanted to honor him. In the station courtyard, officers applauded him and called him a silent hero. Jordan received a symbolic certificate, but when asked how he felt, he responded simply, "I just wish they had listened to me sooner." His words, filled with truth, silenced the crowd. It was the outburst of a boy who had never sought medals or fame, only the chance to protect his family and be taken seriously. The belated recognition brought some relief, but it also left a shadow on Jordan's heart. He understood that, even though he was now treated as a hero, the weight of everything he had experienced would not disappear so easily. The once silent boy had found his voice, but at a cost too great for his age. And it was in this silence filled with memories that, upon returning to his routine, Jordan realized that the story was not over yet, because small signs would cross his path again, reminding him that certain mysteries never end completely. The days returned to a semblance of normalcy. The neighborhood, once gripped by fear and the constant presence of police cars, now seemed to slowly regain its routine. Children played on the sidewalks again, neighbors greeted each other more cautiously, and even Angela, after weeks of tension, managed to prepare dinner without glancing out the window at every strange noise. But for Jordan, nothing was the same. He had seen firsthand what lurked in the shadows of a seemingly ordinary life, and it had changed him. One night, sitting in bed with Lila's empty teddy bear in his hands, Jordan stared out the open bedroom window. The wind rustled the curtains, bringing with it a slight autumn chill. His eyes wandered the silent street, lit only by streetlights, and the sense of vigilance, though dormant, never completely left him. He knew some criminals had been apprehended, but he also understood that not all had been captured. The net was larger, more complex, and perhaps there were still hidden eyes watching, waiting for the right opportunity to strike again. Lila entered the room, smiling, thanked him once again for protecting the family, and lay down next to her brother. Jordan stroked her hair tenderly but said nothing. Deep within him, he carried the certainty that his role was not yet over. His sister's innocence was his greatest treasure, and it was for her that he would always remain vigilant, even when everyone thought the danger had passed. As Angela turned off the living room lights and closed the bedroom door, Jordan turned back to the street. In one of the neighboring houses, a detail caught his attention. A light came on in the window of a room that, as far as he knew, was empty. The scene seemed ordinary, but something inside him pulsed like an omen. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, or perhaps it was the beginning of another hidden truth about to emerge. He took a deep breath, hugged the stitched teddy bear, and let his eyes remain fixed on the silent horizon. He was just a boy, but he had already changed the fate of his family and an entire town. And deep down, he knew that this story wasn't over. It was just the first of many battles he would face. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next exciting tales of courage and mystery. Share this video and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories that will captivate you from beginning to end. Your participation is essential so we can continue bringing you narratives that inspire, thrill, and thrill.